When Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon for the first time. This was already the third NASA mission to send humans to the moon. Seeing the success of the last two missions, the astronauts in this rocket were very confident about their mission and their dream. Their dream was to set foot on the moon. But at that time, they were unaware that their dream would never come true. In April 1970, when their spacecraft was about 330,000 kilometers away from the Earth, they heard a loud bang, suddenly. A huge bang that shook the entire spacecraft. Within a few seconds, the warning lights and alarms start going on loudly. It was found that one of the oxygen tanks had burst, and the other oxygen tank was leaking rapidly. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston, say again, please. Houston, we have a problem. The mission control on the ground couldn't believe it. They believed that the instruments were malfunctioning. But the astronauts in the spacecraft could see through the window that the air was leaking. On the other hand, they see that because of the blast, the spacecraft had shifted from its path so much that it was going kilometers away from the Earth every second. Within a few hours, the astronauts in Apollo 13 were so far away from the Earth that it became a new record. At that time, America and the Soviet Union were engaged in a race. A space race. Who will be the leader in the field of technology? In 1969, both Apollo 11 and Apollo 12 missions were successful. Astronauts did not only step on the moon, but also safely returned to Earth. Kennedy's promise was fulfilled. But it had a side effect. Right after it, the people's and government's interest in spending money on space decreased drastically. It's obvious that people were excited to see a man step on the moon for the first time. But people cannot be so excited for the second, third, and fourth time. The interest in the moon is fading fast. People believe that Apollo 13 would just be another routine flight. For this reason, the American government cut NASA's budget, and many future missions that were planned for the new few years, like Apollo 20, were cancelled. That's why the Apollo 13 mission came at a crucial time in the history of space travel. NASA had to prove to the American government that it was still worth spending money on space. That's why the primary mission objective of Apollo 13 was not only to inspect and survey the moon's soil, but also develop the human capability to work in the moon's environment. The main mission objective of Apollo 13 is scientific exploration of the moon. We hope to find out a lot about the origin of the moon, and from that the origin of our own planet Earth. The design of Apollo 13's spacecraft was similar to that of the previous space missions. Mainly, there were four main components: command module, service module, lunar module, and launch escape system. The spacecraft was launched on a Saturn V rocket. All three astronauts were seated in the command module, which was the main part of the spacecraft. But it was a small part. The command module is just this cone shape, which is only 11 feet long and has a diameter of 13 feet. All the instrument panels, navigation gear, radios, life support system, and small engines were all in this command module. The second most important part was the service module, which had most of the oxygen for the astronauts. It had some more engines too, and fuel cells to generate electricity. The command and service module is often collectively called the command and service module, or CSM in short form. They are connected during the entire mission until the astronauts return to Earth. And only during the re-entry to Earth are they separated from each other. The third part was the lunar module, which was actually supposed to land on the Moon. And once the work on Moon was over, it was supposed to get attached to the CSM module once again. The fourth part, the launch escape system, was not so important for the mission. Its only task was to protect the astronauts from an accident during the launch. It works like this. If there's an accident during the rocket launch, and the rocket catches fire, it safely ejects the astronauts and takes them away from the accident. You can see the lunar module was designed in such a way that only 2 astronauts could sit in it for about 20 hours. Because, as I told you, its original purpose was to land on the Moon and get attached to the CSM module again. But now, it was expected that these 3 people would sit in the lunar module for 4 to 5 days. The engines of the lunar module were not designed in a way that they could be fired repeatedly. To a large extent, this was also a risky maneuver. To conserve supplies and energy, the astronauts were told to shut down all non-essential systems in the spacecraft, including the heaters that were installed. It was very important to save electricity. As per this plan, the astronauts sat in the lunar module, and for the first time, the engines of the lunar module were fired. When an engine is started, it is called a burn. So, they do the first burn to get on the new path. With the help of this burn, they reach the other side of the Moon. The far side of the Moon. They became the first humans in the world to go so far from the Earth. And this record remains unbeatable even now. At their furthest point, they were 400,000 kilometers away from the Earth. If they stayed on this path, they could reach the Earth about 153 hours after launch. But this time margin was very risky. If they reached Earth after so long, then only 1 hour of surplus food, water and oxygen would remain for the astronauts. NASA team on the ground believed that this margin is very narrow. That's why the astronauts were told to burn the lunar module engine for the second time. The engineers in the mission control had done many calculations to find out whether the lunar module engine will be able to handle the second burn or not. These calculations proved correct. When the second burn is done, the flight time of 153 hours was reduced to 143 hours. An 11-hour-long margin of survival. Before the astronauts could relax, another problem arose: the high concentration of carbon dioxide. In spaceships, apart from oxygen tanks, there are canisters of lithium hydroxide to remove carbon dioxide. When astronauts breathe in oxygen, they breathe out carbon dioxide. If that carbon dioxide is not removed, it will result in a large amount of carbon dioxide, which can be problematic. That is why canisters of lithium hydroxide are used, so that carbon dioxide reacts with it and becomes lithium carbonate. But the problem here was that the canisters of lithium hydroxide in the lunar module were enough for only 2 people to survive for 2 days. But here, there were 3 people who wanted to survive for 4 days. The good thing here was that there were some canisters in the command module too. But their filter was square and the ones in lunar module had a circular shape. The experts on the ground had 24 hours to solve this problem. Astronauts from the spacecraft communicated to tell them about all things present around them. Plastic bags, cardboard, some suit hoses, some duct tape. They wanted to create something that could be the solution to this problem. After a few hours of experimenting, they make a contraption to make this work. After giving step-by-step instructions, a new device was created with the things present there, with which the level of carbon dioxide decreases again. Commander Lovell in his book Lost Moon states that the contraption wasn't very handsome, but it worked. The thing they made looked like this. In this entire rescue mission, even the smallest details were taken care of. Astronauts were instructed not to drink more than 200 milliliters of water in a day, because if they drink more water, they will need to urinate. And in this way, the quantity of their urinate could change the direction of the spaceship. That's why they needed to survive by drinking so little water. These 3 astronauts lost 14 kilograms of weight in total. Astronaut Hayes gets a urinary tract infection. After 4 days, when Apollo 13 spacecraft reaches Earth, astronauts realize that they need to burn once more. In their calculations,